Hi everyone, I'm Anna, and today I'm going to talk about what I know about academic language now after taking our class, Academic Language in Dual Language Settings. I'm going to start with what is the language of schooling. According to Schleppegrell, language as a whole allows students to understand and express different meanings depending on their cultural and social context. The language of schooling is the language that allows students to create and express the academic understandings they need to succeed in the school setting. It's a language they need to understand, for example, what the teacher is saying or what the assessments are asking. This type of language is more complex and demanding than the language students use at home, but the language students use at home or in more informal settings helps them build on the language they need at school. So as Schleppegrell concludes, language and content go hand in hand continuously. According to Swires, students from diverse backgrounds use language differently in the school context because their mix of background knowledge, social and cultural experiences, and lexicon varies so much. For example, mainstream students that have access to more resources, experiences, and use academic language at home will be more prepared to succeed in an educational setting than students with fewer privileges. So when students with fewer opportunities go to school, they might struggle because the rules of academic language are not explicit. And Swires calls this a mismatch that holds some students back from succeeding, and Schleppegrell agrees because she believes that the reason students struggle are that they're not familiar with these implied text structures or the activities required in the school context. So because of its complexity and high cognitive demands, we need to learn as educators how to teach the language of schooling explicitly and in context while building on what our students are already bringing with them. So what is academic language and what are its critical components? To describe academic language, Schleppegrell used the metaphor of constellations. In her functional linguistics framework, she says that there is a constant interaction between language and social context and meaning interpretation. And language is described as a set of symbols that students can choose from depending on their context and the meaning they want to convey. She calls these linguistic choices registers or constellations of vocabulary and grammar, and those choices depend on the context that they're being used in, for example, throughout the disciplines like math, science, social studies, etc. Swires uses the metaphor of bricks and mortar, where the bricks represent content-specific words like photosynthesis, and the mortar represents sophisticated but common words that keep the brick words together, like concept or abstract. He thinks that academic language is meant to empower students to use language to develop more sophisticated ways of thinking and to create new meanings by discovering new linguistic constellations, like Schleppegrell would call them. Both authors recognize that even though there needs to be more research conducted on academic language, some of its critical components are vocabulary and concepts specific to each discipline, sentence structures, and grammar. And I think that their perspectives express what students need in order to meet school expectations, which would be the skills to understand others' academic meanings and the skills to create meanings others can understand through listening, reading, speaking, and writing, or swirling, like Dr. Izquierdo tells us. The academic language students need to succeed in the different disciplines is unique, especially because it requires that they develop different types of abilities. For example, I'm going to compare my favorites, social studies and science. The academic language used in social studies textbooks is very abstract, and it requires students to have a sense of time and how the past interacts with the present. They need to understand cause and effect connections and be able to see the dynamic nature of the events recorded in our history. So students have to make lots of inferences and use their background knowledge because social studies books are very long and they don't provide clear explanations. And in science, students need to make inquiries and explore or develop hypotheses. They need to organize messages and explain perspectives. For example, they need to explain concepts and support their findings through evidence. They also need to understand technical terms and concepts and be able to write reports. So these two disciplines require students to develop different sets of language abilities. And mathematics and language arts also have their unique abilities. So how can we help our emergent bilingual students develop academic language? Even though in this class we learned about many strategies we can use with our students, this question reminds me of one of my favorite readings, which was Lily Fillmore's paper about complex text, because she made me reflect on how we might think that emergent bilinguals need to get easier text because they're barely learning a new language. But she says that by doing that, we're not giving our students access to the academic language they need to succeed in school. And so we might be setting them up for failure and doing them a disservice. So one of the most important things that I learned is that my students need to get access to academic language first of all. And another way to help my students acquire academic language is through the SIOP model that we revisited throughout our learning modules, especially the part about providing opportunities for discussion. If I was in a position to make decisions in education, I would definitely start with teacher preparation and administrators and everyone involved in education. Just like Fillmore wrote on her paper, it's hard to admit that we might be underprepared to serve our emergent bilingual students in regards to academic language, but I think it's also hard to recognize our own misconceptions without professional development or classes like this one. And one of the reasons I liked Fillmore is that she was an emergent bilingual student when she was young and she struggled. So when she speaks for emergent bilinguals, I think it's because she lived it herself. And well, in regards to policy, I think that there's a lot of work to be done because there are inequities in our educational system that are the way they are because policies sustain those inequities so much that we don't even recognize them as inequities anymore, but just as ordinary things. Like for example, a very common inequity would be the way we test our students, but I think that I don't have enough experience to recognize all those policies, so I might just need a class like this one about educational policies. And well, these are my references, and thank you all for your attention. Have a good night. Bye-bye.